Beecher Stowe house here in the tavern and online. We appreciate you coming. On behalf of the friends of the Harriet Beecher Stowe, we respectfully acknowledge that the ground on which we stand are traditional Miami and Sean plants. We extend our esteem and gratitude to the indigenous people who call this place home. This is our Voices for Truth discussion series and is sponsored by School Health. So thank you to them. And this is basically how it's going to work. We have topic tonight is Harriet Bunny. And if you did the readings, that's fine. If you didn't do the readings, that's okay too, because we will talk all about it. My name is Katrina. So did I say my name? Well, my name is Christina Hartley. You probably don't know me before. Director here. We have, this is the way it basically works. Our discussion leader is Dr. John Getz. He's going to wave to you. And he's going to start with a little timeline that shows, Harriet's connections to a lot of different things. And then he'll go over the timeline. We'll get into the discussion questions, which I think you all got one of the handouts that shows the discussion questions. And we talk for about an hour. I look at my watch and say, okay, you need to wrap up. So, but we have to be very lucid and informal. So don't forget, if you need to get up and get snacks or if you need the restroom, that's fine. Just go do that. We will. What's the other thing I was going to say? Important bit of information is that the monitor is up here, which shows you the people online, or at least they have. But if you are speaking, you need to face the camera, which is in the center of the table. So think that way you can easily heard. And I put John at the end of the table so that when he's looking at the camera, he's also looking at the screen. So I guess we will go ahead and get started. Let's do a timeline and welcome, Marty. We just did all the introduction stuff, and John's about to talk about someone.
Thank you, Chris. Let's get started. A few key dates here in the life of Harriet Beecher Stowe. To those of you who are volunteers here or regulars, this will be old stuff, but for newcomers, we want to talk about it. She was born in Connecticut, Litchfield, Connecticut, in 1811. Jump ahead to 1832. She's 21 at the time. She moves to Cincinnati along with her father's family. Her father was Lyman Beecher, a very famous preacher of the day, sort of the Billy Graham of that era. And they moved to Walnut Hills, to this house. Lyman and his family do. Harriet was an adult at the time, so she moves downtown with her older sister Catherine to start a school for women. They were educational reformers and believed that women should get the same kind of education that men were getting at the time. So that's the Western Female Institute. So Harriet is in Cincinnati for 18 years, formative years for her. She's 21 when she comes, but these are years that really shape her conscience and her consciousness. Yes, she came to Cincinnati as a New Englander and she left as an American, because here she encountered people who enslaved people. She encountered people who were freedom seekers. And here is where she discovered herself as a writer also in the Semicolon Club, which met every other week, drank some wine, did a little dancing, and read things that they wrote. So she starts thinking of herself as a writer during these 18 years from 1832 to 1850. She also has numerous children during this time. Uh, and by 1850, she moves with her family to Brunswick, Maine, where Calvin, her husband, she got married here in this house in 1836. Calvin is now a professor at his alma mater, Bowdoin College. It's also the year of the fugitive slave law. A number of things come together at that time for her, and she begins writing Uncle Tom's Cabin, which she initially envisioned as about 4 short pieces, and it turned into the big novel that we know about today. So it was published serially in 1851 and 1852 and came out in book form in 1852. It was a blockbuster. It was a huge seller, and very controversial at the time, of course, hated in the South, but loved by many people in the North, and sold enormously. It was the biggest selling book in the world, other than the Bible, in the 19th century. So that's that accounts for part of the readings for tonight, Uncle Tom's Cabin. But she didn't stop there. She kept writing, obviously, for the rest of her, or most of the rest of her life. And what we're going to look at is something she wrote in 1864, a year after her husband retired from teaching. By then he was at Andover Theological Seminary, giving up a salary of $2,000 a year, which was a very good salary in those days. So she becomes the breadwinner of the family and needed to keep writing at this point. And one of the things she writes is in 1864, under the pseudonym of Christopher Crowfield, she publishes The Ravages of a Carpet, which I hope some of you got a chance to read for tonight. It's the first of a series that ran in the Atlantic Monthly called House and Home Papers. They run for the whole year, and she publishes them the next year in book form and starts another series by Christopher Crowfield, even though everybody knew it was Harriet Beecher Stowe who was writing the stuff. A series that will appear in 1865 and 1866, again in the Atlantic, and comes out in book form also in 1868. So she was cranking the things out and writing a lot of other things at this time too. I'm skipping over those to focus on what we're reading for tonight. A book that some of you read excerpts from if you were with us the last time. My wife and I, she publishes in 1870 in the Christian Union, and with another male narrator, interestingly, and she continued to use male narrators in Sam Lawson's old-time Fireside Stories in 1871. So we can talk about maybe the implications of that. She lived on until 1896, so she pretty much spanned the 19th century. And her dates, if you're interested, almost correspond almost exactly to Frederick Douglass's life too. They're really parallel figures in the 19th century. So I think that's probably enough about the timeline. Well, let's get on to the questions. And the first one is kind of an open-ended question. I don't usually start with questions like this, but what is your favorite kind of humor? Does an example come to mind? So this isn't about the readings. We're going to start with something about you. What example comes to mind from your direct experience or from something you read, not for tonight, or saw in a movie or a play? What's funny to you?
Satire.
Satire. Okay. Which we know to be, how do you understand satire?
maybe satire's not the right smart Alex.
Satire is a good term.
Even Colbert. And it's not to be political, but it just, yeah.
I really like self-advocating humor,
Okay.
where people that don't take this so seriously, or even like a lot of comedians now are doing like crowd work. They call it crowd work. You see it online where they're ribbing people in the audience, and as long as a person is in on it, it's always funny to me. It's always just not mean spirited or even they're in on it, but really not taking yourself seriously. And that's my favorite.
Okay. Anybody else?
Like dry humor and things that you might not get if you're not paying attention. So it might be a pun, it might be an understatement or an overstatement that the other person's just saying and doesn't know if you're going to get it or not.
Anybody else?
I would say I like humor that is historical context based. So
Gee, I wonder why.
Monty Python and the Holy Grail.
Oh, I know.
Dennis Peasant, the strange women lying in homes distributing souls is no basis for a system of government. Perhaps very light political cartoons. When I taught high school, I had like a whole, teaching political cartoons to teenagers is hard. So I had like this list of questions, like, here's how you analyze a political cartoon. First, you have to like figure out, okay, so who's in the cartoon? What are they saying and doing? What are they, how does that relate to, so it was kind of a list of questions that you had to kind of learn to be able to decipher a political cartoon.
Speaking of political humor, was that still around? Does anybody remember?
Oh, yeah, I mean,
They are. And
some version of them.
yeah, some version I think is still around. So we have a lot of interest in political satire.
It's just
I personally like trickster things, which is definitely shown in where you are tricking a naive person into believing that something is happening that isn't really happening, which is one of the chapters that we are concerned with tonight, is actually that.
Yeah, kind of thing.
I can name a comedian besides Stephen Colbert, Andy Horowitz. He was wonderful.
I still read Garrison Keillor. He does stuff every
Right,
and it's definitely self-deprecating, frequently political, but in a very understated way. So you know what his opinion is, but he's not going to call anybody by name. So he makes observations about life, and you just say, yeah, I find myself just like that. And I think I relate to him.
Is he on Substack?
He's subscribed. I mean, it's free. It comes in, and he writes a little essay once a week, and you can get it on.
I worked for the Community Foundation. Our national conference was in Minnesota. And he did a whole, like a Prairie Home Day and a whole show for all the Community Foundation people as part of our entertainment. It was phenomenal. It's phenomenal. So I got to see him live.
So here's another example of that dry humor you were talking about too. Well, those are good examples, I think, excellent examples, and some issues about humor that you might want to think about. There are all sorts of theories of humor, what makes people laugh, what's acceptable, what's not. One theory is, and Philip alluded to this one, the theory of power and control involved in humor. In other words, humor can be used to establish power over other people, or to affirm the identity of a group that isn't feeling very powerful. So I've heard it expressed this way: are you punching up or punching down? And punching down is pretty tacky and not very funny usually. Making fun of people who are in worse positions than you are. But punching up is often a way to gain power and to find self-affirmation. Freud had a theory, that, of course, that humor had to do with the release of repression. That people, the psychic energy that we inevitably repress in order to get along with each other comes out in humor. So that's one theory. And another one is an old-fashioned theory, but just incongruity. Things don't match. There's a mismatch between the real and the ideal. Louis Rubin, the American critic, called it the American joke. That is the discrepancy between our American ideals and the way we live up to them or don't live up to them. So those are just some ideas about humor that you might want to think about. So that's a good start. Well, let's get into the text themselves from Harriet and answer the question, is Harriet funny? I found, maybe nobody else did, but I found more than one source of humor in chapter 6 of Uncle Tom's Cabin, where that's the one where Eliza escapes the slave trader Haley. What did you find funny in that chapter, if anything?
I think when I read it, I could see the characters so vividly, running around and doing all their extra things. It was like I was watching a movie, and I don't usually have that experience when I'm reading it once. Doesn't answer your question directly, but that's
that's part of it. I think the fast-moving quality of it.
Okay.
So to summarize it a little bit, it's, they discover that Eliza has gone, and the slave trader Haley, who had just bought her son, is really upset, and Mrs. Shelby wants to give Eliza a chance to escape. And so she tells the enslaved people that are supposed to help, round up the horses and get going to go after her. She tells them to kind of, take it, don't go too fast. And they really take that cover. They, waste all morning trying to catch horses, and they waste all morning trying to, and then they put a little something underneath the saddle of one of them so that he goes all wild. So it really is this whole, it's upsetting in a way because it creates these buffoon characters of the enslavement, but it was done on purpose. They were doing that on purpose because they were trying to waste time and give Eliza a huge head start, kind of thing. So the whole buffoonery is part of the funniness, even though you don't want to make fun of enslaved people who are being buffoons, but that was part of what they were doing in order to waste time.
Yeah. If I could add right from the very beginning, Shelby comes out of the house and there's a bunch of little kids that are making fun of him, and they're laughing, and he's ticked off that they're making fun of him, and then when Haley shows up, they make fun of him even more. And I think Mrs. Shelby purposely, she picks Sam, who is a little prankster as his own. It's the way I viewed it as time went on. And she specifically names the two horses. I think she knows that those two horses are not going to be welcome horses for this. And I think Sam gets off on that. Sam now goes, okay, I have permission. And the whole slapstick characteristic of it, including when they finally get Haley on a horse, that they make hats for themselves that spook the horses. And so anytime they get near the horses, they make these that they're making hats for themselves, and anytime they get near the horses run away. So they have done all kinds of things to make it go wrong, make everything go.
Yes.
And I think that Mrs. Shelby, with the way she asks Sam to get those two specific horses, kind of gave him the idea, okay, she's asking for trouble, I'm going to help her. Yeah. I found that chapter very funny. And the other two chapters had elements of funniness in it, but they were pretty deep in terms of not being funny too at the same time.
Mhm. Yeah, that's where Dan told me this morning that I had a strange sense of humor.
Reading the right cat.
Yes.
Strong.
So, yeah, I mean, you've got this crazy combination of basically minstrel show humor with Sam and Andy and some of the ways they act, but you see behind the mask that they know what they're doing. They're using this as a to turn the tables to, suddenly the enslaved people are the ones in power. Over Haley, this guy who's supposed to be smarter than they are and more powerful and all that, and they're taking great delight in making it impossible for him to get going. So in some ways, it's a sort of parody of the whole pursuit of freedom seekers. And a lot of American stories about one of my grad student companions years ago used to say, American literature is nothing but hunt stories and boat stories. People go hunting or they get in boats and hunt whales. And so Moby Dick would be the greatest because it's a hunt story and a boat story at the same time. But there are a lot of hunting stories in Faulkner and also going all the way back to James Fenimore Cooper back in Harriet's era. So there's kind of this sense of sort of controlling the wilderness or something in these hunting stories, but here it's the opposite. It's all thwarted. It's all turned on its head. So I think the power reversal is really a big part of the humor here. And if in the next chapter it continues because they use reverse psychology to lead Haley down a path that leads nowhere, trying to convince him that this is where Eliza would have gone. First, they throw out that idea, then they pull it back and they say, nah, she probably took the main road, which is what Haley wants to do. But then they've got him thinking, and so he goes down this path that they originally posed, and it goes nowhere. So the stakes are high. It's a serious game, but they turn it into a game. And it is a good example I think, of what Paul Laurence Dunbar said about how much life is going on behind the mask. So much is going on with these guys. Anybody find anything else funny in this besides this? I mean, that's the main point of the chapter, but anything else satirical or funny in here?
Reading it pretty quickly, rereading it pretty quickly.
Well, look at the character of Sam and the way he's described sometimes. Stowe says he has a comprehensiveness of vision and a strict lookout to his own personal well-being that would have done credit to any white patriot in Washington. Now remember, this is being written, or this book is written partly in response to the Fugitive Slave Law and the Compromise of 1850. So she's pretty down on politicians in here. And by comparing Sam to one of them, it's not a compliment. He's looking out for himself, just like those people who voted for the compromise. And she also says, if Sam's head did not contain a very profound wisdom, it still contained a great deal of a particular species much in demand among politicians of all complexions and countries, and vulgarly denominated knowing which side the bread is buttered.
Right. Well,
So that's Sam.
yeah, so if I could add another thing about Sam, that's only a very brief statement in there. Sam's a little ticked off that Tom got to go on a trip and he didn't get to go. Did anybody else notice that? He said, "I'm going to show him I'm as good as Tom," because Tom has been sent on a small errand, but Sam didn't get to go, and so he gives a little complaint that he's not as good as that. They don't think he's as good as Tom, and then he moves on. Am I dreaming that, or
No, that's Tom, because he's trustworthy, has frequently been sent on small errands. At this point, he's been sold. He's part of the deal that Haley has made.
right?
So Sam sees a chance here. Oh, maybe I could get Tom's position on the plantation.
Right.
So he's out for himself too. And it shows how the slaveholders were able to enslave people against each other, create these rivalries. Well, somebody's got a good position, somebody else wants it. Okay, he says Tom's down, I'm up. Maybe I can go up. Maybe I can get his position. So that doesn't reflect well on Sam, but it reflects even more poorly, I think, on the slaveholders themselves who cultivated this kind of spirit. And of course, there's the alliance between women, especially mothers, and the enslaved people, with Mrs. Shelby giving them the word, sort of signifying in a way. She doesn't come out and say, just slow the guy down, slow Haley down. But she says, "Oh, poor Jerry, this horse has been tired last week. Don't ride him too fast." I mean, they know how to read between the lines. I mean, that's signifying as part of African American tradition, saying things that aren't to be taken perfectly literally. A deeper meaning there. So. And also Harriet's humor, I think, in all of these chapters, we can look at what's not funny or what's not supposed to be funny, and that's telling jokes, simply jokes. Haley's the only one who uses the word joke in this chapter. Yeah. When he talks about your old lady doesn't like me, he tells that to Shelby. And Shelby says, "Oh, no,
Spoken of.
yeah, you shouldn't speak
Dryly, I think.
Yeah.
Dryly.
And Shelby's offended. And Haley said, "Oh, it was just a joke." Harriet doesn't tell jokes. She's got other ways of doing her humor. All right. One other thing about Sam. There's another quote. Sam approached he approached Mrs. Shelby with as good a determination to pay court as did ever a suitor after a vacant place at St. James or Washington. Remember, the Southern aristocracy like to compare themselves to the aristocracy in England. Their superiority, we're just better than other people. And Sam understands the need to act that way. So here comes Mrs. Feldman, he's like a suitor at the vacant, for a vacant place at St. James or in Washington DC. He's saying, isn't that much different these days from England? So she gets her digs in there. Well, let's go on to to one of these chapters that nobody but me finds funny. Humor also serves a variety of purposes in chapters 18 and 19, where the Vermonter Ophelia tries to assert herself in the New Orleans household of her cousin Augustine St. Clair. Which part of these chapters is amusing to you?
But it's funny how Dinah knows where every little thing is and all these little cubby holes. And I think there was a funny thing about like, we may as well have given these to a magpie or a squirrel or I can't remember what it was, but Dinah knows where everything is. Despite Ophelia's, it has to be here, it has to be there.
Well, the way that Ophelia acts within the household reminds me. She comes and she's telling everybody what to do and how to do it and micromanaging the people who are doing the actual work and trying to get them to do all of these, organizational things the way that she would do it, but she's not actually doing the work herself. She just comes in and tells everybody what to do and how to do it. And so that, that in itself is, gives her the right and the expertise and all that kind of stuff. It kind of is a counterfoil to the actual wife of the house who just lays around and does nothing because she's like, why should I bother? Everyone's gonna do everything for me and I'm not gonna. But yeah, Ophelia is very much, I think, a knockoff on Catherine, and I wonder if Catherine saw that.
I heard that too. Because they were still writing domestic books together at this time, or at least one of them. So yes, I suspect she missed that. But I think it's there for sure.
She may not have been self-aware.
Yeah. I don't think Catherine ever doubted herself very much. So,
Some people say,
yeah.
Oh, I'm just laughing all over again. What's this drawer for, Dinah? It promotes anything, miss. Miss Ophelia pulled out a fine, influence DAMASK. But that was my question. So anyways,
Damage.
fine tablecloth stained with blood. Been used to envelop so raw meat. I mean, that's how French, piece of raw beef and.
Yeah. So whose side are you on in this conflict between Dinah and Ophelia?
Dinah, of course.
Yeah, not only that, but St. Clair takes Ophelia to task and says, while they're having their very serious discussion on slavery, he tells her that she should worry about the big things. That Dinah gives them a fantastic dinner every single night, fantastic, and who cares whether she's got I think he says 6 different cups of sugar hid throughout the kitchen, and all the things that he says are really quite trivial compared to what she does wonderfully. And so he does take his cousin to task about that. Yeah, that's an interesting dynamic between the two of them concerning Dinah. Yeah, so that I thought that was funny that he flipped it around to say these aren't that important compared to the important things that she does.
Yeah, here she comes from New England. in Vermont with her Puritan work ethic, confronting it's just society in the South that's very different, slower paced. And she gets up at 4 o'clock in the morning for no apparent reason except to get to work. For a vigorous onslaught on the cupboards and closets of the establishment of which she had the keys. So she's like a New England reformer. She's got the answers to everything. And I think here's Harriet reflecting a little bit on her New England background. Maybe we weren't always right about slavery, but maybe not about everything else.
St. Clair says this great thing. He says, "My dear Vermont,
Yeah.
you natives up by the North Pole set up an extravagant value on time." It's like,
Yeah.
you know, why do you put so much value on it? Just relax.
And in a few days, she had thoroughly reformed. And that word reformed and reformer comes up a couple of times in reference to her. Every department in the house to a systematic pattern, but her labors in all departments that depended on the cooperation of servants were like those of Sisyphus or the Danaides. And everybody knows who Sisyphus was. They got rolling up the rock, up the mountain, and the Danaids were in pretty much a similar situation. They had to carry water in a sieve to try to fill a tub in one of the versions, or the tub leaks in another version. So with this a certain futility about all of this.
In all of this, she gives the slaves power.
Yeah,
Dinah, well, you know, she refers to her as a self-taught genius. And like geniuses in general, was positive, opinionated, and erratic to the last degree. She believed that the cook can do no wrong, and there was never any failure in her kitchen, you know. Meanwhile, it looks like a cyclone hit it.
but she's a great cook.
She's a great cook, and she's got the power and back off. But she's really good in doing the characterization and writing the characterization here.
Yeah, she's always interested in kitchens. Go back to Rachel Halliday. Kitchen show up a lot in her fiction, and this one, and of course, by the time you get to Simon Green, the whole house is a mess, and good meals are not being produced there. But yeah, I found this passage interesting. Like a certain class of modern philosophers, Dinah perfectly scorned logic and reason in every shape, and always took refuge in intuitive certainty. And here she was perfectly impregnable. That sound like anybody?
Oh, yeah, no comment.
Well, I was thinking of Ralph Waldo Emerson. Okay,
We'll go with that.
like a certain class of modern philosophers,
Yeah,
transcendentalists.
yeah, for her, that would be modern philosophy.
Yeah, they perfectly scorned logic and now he believed he had a higher kind of reason, but they always took refuge in intuitive certainty. Intuitions were crucial for Emerson and the transcendentalists. They rebelled against the 18th century idea of a very logical, orderly world because they saw the world alive and organic living whole. And her kitchen is sort of an example of organic form. It's not mechanical form like but it's organic in the sense of it's alive and it works. Much like a lot of romantic poetry, like a lot of the literature of the transcendentalists, like Thoreau, like Walden. You know, he's going off in all directions in there, but he believes it comes together. So organic form was one of the things that the Romantics, both in Britain and America, really believed in strongly, that a poem has to kind of find its own form rather than being a sonnet, heroic couplets, or one of those old forms that you impose on it. So I think she's doing something very interesting here. And there she sits smoking her pipe in the middle of the kitchen, Diana, invoking the muses.
Yeah.
Where?
There
Go
was
ahead.
there was something that happened though at the during the chapter, toward the end of the chapter. I started getting a feeling that St. Clair's household is this total chaos. He's got a large number of slaves, but they are this. I don't know why they don't all run away, because nobody's really watching them. They're having a great time cooking for one another, doing things with one another, and he has no overseer, so it's in total disarray. And then comes the reminder. Prue comes into the door with her biscuits, and we learn that there's another sign, another type of slave, what we do know about slavery, one that does have overseers, one that does have the hate that St. Clair just doesn't really much care that things are falling apart in this house, as so long as it's working, and it is working. But Prue ends up dying, and a reflection on Prue gets us going into the next chapter. But I thought when Prue came in, here's the hammer to tell us it isn't all just fun and games here. It isn't all just fun and games. So Prue brought us back to a focus on what was really happening in the South.
But even Prue has as horrible as her situation is, has an interesting line where Tom tries to talk to her about going to heaven, becoming a Christian, and she says, heaven, ain't that where white folks go? I'd rather go to torment and get away from Mr. and Mrs.
Yeah.
It's not that far from this quote of Prue to some things Huckleberry Finn says in his book about, remember, he decides I'll go to hell, I guess, rather than turn Jim in. And even earlier, he says, very early in that book, he's being lectured by Miss Watson, about heaven, and he needs to shape up. And he said, I figured if she was going there, that's not where I'm going to go. So I think I wonder if this is even in some strange way a source for some of that. Because that book was written somewhat later than this. But heaven is for those white people. I don't want to be around them anymore. I've had enough of that. Anything else about this chapter that's potentially funny or?
Like St. Clair says, we masters are divided into two classes, oppressors and oppressed.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
He feels oppressed because he's got all these people running around that he doesn't know what to do with.
But he doesn't seem to, at least he knows it. He doesn't
Yeah.
seem to be bothered by it too much. I think he'd prefer not to be the oppressor.
Yeah. He's a jokester. He doesn't take things very seriously, and that's part of his problem. Tom winds up running the household because he can't. Once Tom shows up, he gets Adolf out of the way, and so he starts running the household. And there's a phrase called describing him called negligent drollery. He is kind of funny. Some of the things he says in a sort of cynical way, I think he uses humor to avoid the serious implications of his lifestyle, even to avoid talking to Ophelia sometimes about serious things. She has to really prod him to get him to talk about his situation because he keeps putting her off with jokes. When in the course of human events it becomes necessary for a fellow to hold 2 or 3 dozen of his fellow worms in captivity, a decent regard to the opinions of society requires, he'll spout off these things that are funny, but in the context of the life he's living, they're not very good at all. He dodges responsibility. And she chides him for that. She said, "Get serious with me." And they finally do eventually have a serious conversation that Henry Louis Gates and maybe some of you thought went on too long, but it is, she does finally pin him down on this. And get him to face up to some things. He doesn't really act on them. Later on in the book, the only people who have really an impact on him are little Eva, his daughter, when she dies, and Tom. The arguments don't do it, because he knows all the arguments. He's got them all, and he doesn't believe any of the arguments in favor of slavery, but he doesn't do anything about it either. So he's a complicated character, and I think he misuses humor to avoid facing serious things, serious responsibilities.
Natural human reaction.
Yeah.
It's a natural
So-
human reaction.
So I have a question, John, if I can.
Mhm.
The question is, the next chapter in this whole series in the book was on Topsy. And I found that Eva and Topsy's interactions sometimes were quite humorous. And I was wondering why you didn't pick a chapter to talk about how Eva and Topsy got into some crazy stuff together.
Well, I didn't want to make you read too much. That's the reason. I mean, and Ophelia's reaction to Topsy is very interesting because she's put off by her at the beginning. Much as she disapproves of Eva interacting with enslaved people on the plantation. So this is the supposedly liberal northerner coming in who has her own prejudices within herself that she eventually gets over. Once partly through the influence of Eva and Eva's death, and he winds up, really taking to Topsy and protecting her. She's the one enslaved person who is not sold once Sinclair dies, because Ophelia protects her. But it takes time for that relationship to develop and for Ophelia to get over those prejudices that she brings with her from the north. Interesting. Let's talk about the character of Adolf for a minute. Anybody pay much attention to him? He's a very intriguing character, not a major character in the book, but he's the guy who was sort of running the plantation before Tom came along. And not very successfully.
Not very good. And so he was a little put off that he got pushed away, pushed to the side because Tom was better.
Yeah, he's described as a dandy. I mean, he's a highly dressed, quote, mulatto man, attired in the ultra extreme of the mode and waving a scented cambric handkerchief in his hand.
Yeah. So he even describes himself. He's going to a party that night, and he borrowed St. Clair's clothing, and he's talking to a woman who has borrowed some clothing somehow. She's wearing the dandy earrings, And yeah, so he's known as Mr. St. Clair to the Black community, to this weird Black community that we don't learn too much about, that goes out partying as their dandies, like you said. Yeah, so that St. Clair again didn't have the control of him and just let him go. I mean, you have
Yeah, he wears St. Clair's clothes.
yeah, it just takes his clothes, it takes his identity, Mr. St. Clair. He goes to parties under the identity of I'm Mr. St. Clair.
Yeah,
Well, part of that, I think, is, we do have to remember that we're in New Orleans. We're not on a plantation. We're not
Yeah.
in the.
yeah, that's true.
There's a big difference between New Orleans society and even the enslaved people in New Orleans have a lot of different, tasks and jobs and things that they do both within the household and outside. There's much bigger society of enslaved people in New Orleans than there would be on outlying plantations. We'll learn more about that with Cassie later, but yes, there's a difference between the
Yes,
two. So
that's very important. And Dinah does not approve of these other two light-skinned enslaved women and him going to these balls. She says, you people, you forget who you are.
Mhm.
You forget the reality of the situation we're living in. You think you can be white or act white. That is not going to work. And she turns out to be right. When St. Clair dies and everybody gets sold, those distinctions don't make any difference.
So I do want to move on to the next story if we can, but one other observation that's not has to do with humor, but it really struck me in this particular chapter, and that is all of the, cultural historic references that Harriet makes. Like she talks about Sisyphus as if, everybody should know that. She quotes the Declaration of Independence, just out of the blue. So these kind of higher intellectual things that she's doing within the story, just because that is her own education and upbringing and so forth.
It also appeals to her target audience, Northerners.
Yeah, if she's publishing this in the Atlantic, that's an educated audience who would get those references.
All right, sorry.
Oh, important points. All right, let's talk about the ravages of a carpet. I think most of us would find this a little easier to relate to, maybe. What's funny in this piece?
People are just like this. People are so. I actually knew somebody once who had a room that you were not allowed to go into.
Oh, yeah.
Well, when never mind. My household that I grew up in, every room values. Okay. When we went to visit my aunt and uncle, no, you can't do that with things.
The same Anna.
Yeah.
Like in every Black family in the 70s had one room with the furniture with the plastic covers and
Only for company twice a year.
Interesting that they started out not being that way, but it's like their daughters who are now upon adulthood, they want to be seen as part of society, and so they kind of encourage this behavior of having a formal parlor area. At least I saw the daughters as kind of trying to push in that direction, but.
Did this house have a room that they, like a formal parlor?
This house did. formal parlor up in front, and but it was used pretty frequently because there wasn't, there wasn't a secondary parlor area. When this house was the Beecher family home, this section here was outside. So it was everything that you see on the outside that's yellow. So across the front and north side, that was the original Beecher home. And then this was a later addition. So it wasn't as big. They had a dining room and a parlor, and then the study, which was Lyman Beecher's home office. And those were in the kitchen. Those were the rooms downstairs. So bedrooms upstairs, and that you weren't in the parlor. Where else would you be if you were entertaining or sewing?
In the carpet story, didn't they end up migrating to father's study?
Yeah, where all the
Yeah.
old stuff was.
So it's what's interesting. This story was very humorous to me. And then I gave it to my wife to read. I laughed out loud while I was reading it. And I gave it to my wife to read, and she read in another room. I could hear the laughter coming. Because as you know, we moved down here to Florida about 3 to 4 years ago. And within a year, it was like, well, we have to get a new carpet. And and our daughter is advising on the colors of carpet and everything to get. Well, we have to get shades for the window. What kind of shades? So everything that was happening actually happened to my wife and I here. So it was this pure humor to me. I just love this story because I experienced this story.
So as Chris said, who engineers this transformation of the house? The daughters get the idea. They plant the seed, and at first, even Christopher Crowfield's wife is a little hesitant about it. She said, "Oh, they still like my plants, and I don't want to move to Canary, maybe." But eventually, she's on board with the kids. Now, Harriet, at this point, I checked these ages of her daughters at this point, and the twins would have been about 27. Frederick would have been 23. Georgiana, but he was off the war. Georgiana would have been about 20. And the youngest, Charlie, would have been only about 13, so he wouldn't have been in on it. But I wonder if she went through something like this. Although at this very time, she was building this elaborate house in Hartford, Connecticut. Oklahoma was called. It didn't work out. They couldn't really afford to stay there. But so in a way, she's sort of caught up in the very thing that she's describing here, I think. But it does speak about the power of women to control the house. It's the wife and the daughters, Mary Ann and Jenny. And of course, his wife was a wonderful homemaker in their original house. And I think what a home that woman made of our house from the very first day she moved into it. Whose side are you on in this conflict about the parlor? Should it be redecorated, redone, or not? I think this is a very interesting question to think about.
What?
It's a shift in values, right? I mean, right, he goes to great lengths to describe the furniture we have and the type that's built to last, but to be passed down over generations. It's not to be swapped out every time there's change in trend. So I think what you're seeing is a fundamental shift in value. Family, how excited they might let themselves at the behest of the daughters.
But then when they go to get some of the furniture reupholstered, they're traumatized. It's just so pathetic and so in such a poor condition that there's no way we're gonna reupholster this. It's not worth it. You need to get good new stuff. This is garbage at this
But
point.
it was meant to last forever, it was time. Good thing they don't need to be real upholstered. How come she has the narrator be Christopher? I mean, she wrote Uncle Tom's Cabin. Well, why does she have the story told from a man's point of view?
That's an excellent question. Anybody have any ideas about that?
Because it has more credibility with their audience. Women were not, as authors, women were not well thought of, but I think it's a credibility issue, I think.
Disagree. I think it's more of the idea that it's supposed to be satirical. Here's this man who's giving, it's the housekeeping stuff from his perspective. And we don't think of the housekeeping stuff from a male perspective in the 1860s and 70s. I think it's not necessarily a credibility thing. I think it's more of the idea that, well, what does the guys think about this? And, this is also the book where the line "women are the architects of society" comes from. And that's because the daughters are later talking in front of the dad about how after the war, we're gonna rebuild society, and we've already done a lot as women to keep things going during the war. We don't have to rebuild like they did it back in Europe. We can be at the forefront of building of society. So it's, I think a lot of it is just that, what is the male? The male is only thinking about how it, costs money, it's cheap at the beginning, but then it's gonna cost more money and more money and more money, and then we don't even use it. What? So I think it's more of a satirical look at the way guys think of running the household.
Nightmares of that.
Or nightmares? Do you have nightmares? Although he has little fairies.
Yeah,
Well, it's probably not like stories of he saw fairies all the time.
I think I've read that, yeah.
So.
That's Ralph kind of going.
Oh, sir, okay, yeah. Anyway,
This guy sort of reminds me of Calvin in some ways. It's like he might have been, so it seems, let's find out who's on what side. Who's for Christopher and who's for the women changing the place.
Still living the same.
At the risk of getting in trouble for this.
Environment is important.
Yeah, getting in trouble. I just raise my hands up and say, do what you want. We went to New York 2 weeks ago, and my daughter-in-law and my wife found two tables. They thought, oh, this is really nice. Just do it. So now we're waiting for a shipment from New York City on 2 pieces of furniture. It just doesn't do. I just go, all right, just it'll look good. Good, bye. So I think men give in to the women because they don't want to have conflict. I know that's why there's no reason to have conflict over a table.
Picky battles.
Yeah.
Did anybody see any parallels here between Ophelia and Dinah fighting over the kitchen and these people disagreeing about redoing the parlor?
Because yes, I want to, we want to refurnish our living room. We super old couch, and we want to move some things around and stuff, and but we're waiting for the kids to move out. Cat to not make messes anymore. Yeah. All good stuff. But it's also, once we refurnish it, so I don't wanna, I wouldn't like just, like, tuck it away, I would want to.
Well, Christopher does make a statement that I think probably most of us would be suspicious of when he says, I hate new furniture, I hate anything new. That's a little extreme. And so, yeah, I think how seriously should we take all of this in this story? Joan Henry takes it pretty seriously. She says, yes, this was written as entertainment during the dark phase of the Civil War, some of the darkest times of the Civil War. But there, ironically, the Civil War sparked an economic boom in manufacturing. And things like carpets were able to be produced much more cheaply. And textile mills, armament factories, and even meat packing improved a lot, which no doubt benefited Cincinnati. Power looms had already been developed to turn out the volume of cheap carpets. But she says this, the American parlor of the 1830s, the setting for Harriet Beecher Stowe's literary apprenticeship at a center of women's cultural power, was a multi-purpose room. The new parlor of the 1850s and 60s, and this gets to the point Eric was making, I think, about a change in values or a change in times, became a museum of elegant and costly gewgaws, as Harriet calls it in another place. It betrayed not a trace of human activity. Do they write letters, sew, embroider, crochet? Do they ever romp and frolic? What books do they read? Do they sketch or paint? This is Harriet talking. Of all these possibilities, the mute and muffled room says nothing. They closed up the fireplace, that symbol of warmth. Now they got a radiator, which is better. I mean, central heating furnaces are a better deal than a fireplace in every room. But there's the same pattern happens in My Wife and I, that book that we talked about the last time, where Mr. Van Arsdale has retreated to his study with all the old furniture up there. And that's where the narrator likes to hang out with him, and the one daughter who's very career-minded hangs out up there with her father too. They don't, but people are in the parlor in that story too, socialize.
But people ultimately prefer the original mess.
Yeah. The warmth.
They want to revert to that. That's what happens after they make their parlor so grandiose and untouchable.
Yeah.
It becomes that room with plastic over the top.
Where it's impossible to be comfortable.
Right.
Stick.
But it is a shift from the parlor, which was an open space for everybody, to his office, which becomes the new parlor. And you could say there's kind of a shift to what you were talking about, Joe, there is this dawning reaction among the literary establishment against the success of women writers in the first half of the 19th century. And even Harriet, who was one of the founders of the Atlantic, sort of got squeezed out of the literary scene as time went on. So I think it is maybe a commentary on times are changing for women, some of the influence that they used to have, even though they seem to be in control in this story, maybe it isn't going to be as great as it's been.
Don't some of you believe this has to do with having small children in the home? As people get older, they don't really, they want to have a trophy room or whatever, I think, where everybody is a hero. But little kids ain't gonna put up with that. They're gonna be everywhere. So as you get older, well, there's a point where you may have grandchildren coming in, but I think it might have a lot to do with just having kids in the house.
You know, like when you read Architectural Digest or 7-Eleven or something, and you know, oh, we want a comfortable profanity. Kids were always in this room, like, yeah, your kids and you're important. These water dogs are really.
Well,
Funny.
Here's Christopher's statement about, he loves furniture made with a view to its lasting from generation to generation. Heavy mahogany, guiltless of the modern device of veneering. Like maybe we're just putting a veneer over some things now, where the old values might have been more solid and guiltless. I'm hearing that as a pun. About building things. And we are entering the Gilded Age at this point. A term that was coined by Mark Twain in the book of the same name, The Gilded Age, that he wrote with Charles Dudley Moore, 1873. Not that long after this.
Which is a phenomenal TV show on HBO or Max or whatever it is. I haven't seen it. Oh my gosh, it's really good.
The Gilded Age?
Yeah.
Oh, it's excellent.
But I don't think it's based on Twain's novel.
No, it's sort of based
Yeah.
on, it's based on with Mrs. Astor and, you know, sort of true, sort of not true, some of the same characters and Mrs. Vanderbilt.
And they filmed that up in, where are the houses we saw
Newport.
up in Newport.
Yeah.
Yeah, and Twain was writing his book at the same time he was building this ornate mansion in Hartford, Connecticut too. So these people were caught up in the very thing that they're critiquing.
Which he couldn't afford either.
Pardon?
He couldn't afford either.
Yeah. I think we may have already answered the last question about this. The presence of humor detract from the seriousness of the book. I don't think so.
Helps us get through it.
Yeah, that's true, because it's a terribly painful book. What do you make of this intertwining of the serious and the comic?
That seems to be, I mean, even when that little book that we read at the very beginning of the tour about how she's getting married, and it's like this indifference when it's humor, you kind of reads indifference, but it's also funny. You know, the way she's talking about really, like how she talks to her friends, like that's really
Like, now we're gonna be harm.
right.
That's
And it's just like, you would only talk like that to a friend, you know, be that, it was something funny with a friend, so it would have been, might not have started her well if she didn't sort of put some of herself in the book.
And I think life itself is this blend of the humorous and the tragic all the time. And Shakespeare, when you think about him, Romeo and Juliet was written just about the same time, same period when he wrote Midsummer Night's Dream. And they both start with women, or they both involve women having to marry people they don't want to marry. One of them turns out just fine because the fairies intervene and take care of everything. The other one is a tragedy. It's the same stuff, same material. So I think we're always going to find that combination. I want to leave you with one thought. My closing, Chris always allows me to make one closing statement. This is to recommend a book to you, which is called The Good Old Days, They Were Terrible.
Okay.
This is a book by Otto Bettman, who ran the Bettman Archive. And so he's got all these cartoons from the era. He's writing about the Gilded Age, about this period that we are being told is the greatest moment in American history these days by a certain political figure whom I will not name. Let's get back to that period from 1870 to about 1913. This is exactly the period this guy is writing his book about. and it's not very complimentary.
No.
It's a beautiful look at the people who were left out of the prosperity at that time, the horrible living conditions, the state of health, food.
Yeah.
So if you get a chance, look this up. You can still find it. I think it's out of print, but
Yeah.
probably get it on Amazon or find it at libraries. So,
Who's the author?
Otto Bettman of the Bettman Archive. Bettmann. All right.
So, thank you all for coming this evening. Thank you for contributing to our great discussion. Make sure you check our website for all of the programming that's coming up. We do have still space left on the Riverfront Walking Tour for Saturday. I will make a caveat though, that is on Friday, I'm going to go check to see if is dry enough for him. So, but so check on Saturday. I'll we'll put something out to go and if you know so forth. And anybody that's already signed up, we will confirm with them for sure or not. But so lots of great events coming up. Check it all out.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you very much.
Lots of fun.
Thanks for coming.
Dan?